So I had this idea, right? We have a vampire and a werewolf who were friends before in the same vigilante syndicate, only to clash from a misunderstanding of a traumatic event, now have become enemies of each other because of their conflicting ideals. And then they became lovers. Yeah, and then, cinema. Welcome to your Hugo Vlad Early Access Guide video, where we'll be dissecting this new character's kit and how he's been able to keep such a snatched waist. Like seriously, that dye program needs to be shared on some Instagram reel. But Hugo Vlad is nothing special in the sense that he's coming to us as our third premium ice offensive unit. Yet, with his new kit revolving around a new damage mechanic, how will Hugo Vlad be able to differentiate himself from the crowd? And is it worth investing to him, aside from the girlies who have already confirmed their fate? Some of us are on the fence about this freakishly tall dichromatic-eyed figure. It's your boy Josh, and let's start out with our early access guide to Hugo Vlad. Sing! Before we jump in, I must let you guys know that this footage and content is coming from the creative early access server. If y'all would like to continue to get early access content like this, please hit the like button, as it will go a long way to help making this content creation journey of ours a reality. So thank you, and on with the video. And with that, why don't we start where everything starts? The tip. As in the tip of the iceberg. And that tip is the kit. Hugo Vlad's whole shtick is to utilize his teammates to get the enemies into the stun state. Yeah, see, all those other things like basics and other attacks and stuff, you can just forget for now, as the only setup the vampire needs is either a strong punch or kick to the dome to get things started. Let's first look at his core skill, Terminating Verdict. The initial core skill grants an attack buff based off of the amount of stun units you have in your team. With 1 unit, you get 300. With 2, you get 900. So with the preferential desire to get to stuns as soon as possible, it's better to run the Vigilante with a double stun formation. Then the core passive will grant Hugo Vlad a status called the Dark Abyss Reverb. That will grant him 12% crit rate and 25% crit damage for 6 seconds. You might think that's a short amount of time, but for Hugo Vlad, that's all he's gonna need. As during the stun state, whenever he uses an EX skill or ultimate, it'll trigger a new damage type called Totalize, increasing the damage multiplier of the finishing move by an initial 1000% and will increase the skill damage multiplier based off of the time left over from the stun window. So let's not get ahead of ourselves, this is how it's going to look like. Once you land a daze, you get the enemy into the stun state. You'll want to utilize at least Hugo Vlad's chain attack once, which will grant him said revert state buff. Then, right after you finish the chain, utilize your EX special, called Punishment. No, I kid you not, ladies. The writing makes up itself. Or Ultimate to hit a large attack that condenses the rest of the stun window into one large bomb of a scythe attack. And as I just mentioned, the Totalize will condense the rest of the stun state and actually end it. But don't worry, Hugo has some ways to make this a benefit to you. Not only will the attack gain additional 1000% damage multiplier, but in addition, the time that you don't use for the rest of the stun will get condensed into an additional damage multiplier. So for each of the remaining seconds of stun time from 5 seconds or less, you'll gain 280% per second. And from 5 to 15 seconds total, you'll gain an additional 100% each, with a total of 3400% potential gain at max core. He's literally firing his laser, worth millions of damage. Now I know that's actually a ton of math, so let's actually break that down in terms of time. The way to maximize this buff is to activate it within a window of the 12 to 10 seconds away from the end of the stun. This means that with an average stun time of 13 to 12 seconds, which most units have unless they're directly shortened, you'll want to use your EX Special or Ultimate to totalize an enemy within the 2 seconds of finishing the chain portion of stun going into the gray bar. 2 seconds is somewhat generous, as the only thing you'll want to do after a stun is essentially pop the Totalize. There's very little thinking here with HUGO'S Vlad, so just remember this. Whenever you finish your chain, pop an ult or EX Special to bust all over your enemies. Then after, the core ability will actually refund you some of your days, 25% max to be exact, and you can only achieve that if you have at least 5 seconds of stun to spare, which is easy to achieve if you're busting as early as possible. And that's pretty much it. A majority of Hugo's kit is actually revolved around this whole gimmick, and the rest of his abilities such as basic, assists, dodges are quite non-factor, to the point that you can just have Hugo sit in the back and wait for those juicy stun windows. Like here in one of my very first runs of Hugo, I get amazed at how fast we get back into the stun window. Yet there is an extra ability tied to the basic called the Dark Abyss Concerto, which will allow you to perform an extra slash and ice beam combo with this charge attack at the end of your basic 4. However, this is so non-factor within his regular rotation that only until you reach M4 will this be impactful, but that'll be saved for the end of the video where we talk about investments. And to be very candid here, Hugo Vlad's abilities are actually really cool, and his animations are smooth. Yet, if you're trying to play optimally, we barely get to see them, as the only reason you'll want to rotate into him is to chain in the EX or ult for Totalize, or if you just want him standing around or farming. Now, let's start heading into his build, and by golly, is Hugo as difficult to build as it is to keep him from bickering with his gay wolf butler husband. Because Hugo's main gimmick is surrounding a one-shot wonder of an attack, it's important that we focus primarily on his crit rate, such that we can make sure that each of his Totalizes are hitting those nice, juicy crit multipliers. His crit rate threshold will be a perfect 88%, because the reverb state will grant him 12% crit rate at M0. So, how are we going to achieve this astronomical investment level? Well, first let's start off with his core ability, granting him 14.4%. So at base, he's already starting out with 19.4%. Then let's head up the W engines, the signature, which looks so baller by the way. Like, he is the first character to have a non-ball as his W engine, and the rings look beautiful. The Myriad Eclipse is a juggernaut of an attack-based weapon option that provides 713 attack, with 24% crit rate in the substat and 45% crit damage up front, for a total of 93% crit value. For those who don't know what crit value is, it essentially is a computational value that is primarily used for evaluating a certain drive or weapon's crit contribution. It doesn't mean anything, but it means something at the same time. So with a ton of crit rate and damage, what else does this weapon bring? Well, after using an EX special, chain attack, or ultimate, the equipper is granted absolute zero death, an ability for 3 seconds allowing them to ignore 25% defense when landing a hit. And unfortunately, no, this effect cannot apply to non-ice users. I think they've been clamping down on these since the Time Weaver changes, but alas, Enormous Vlad gains so much from this pure stat stick and allows his rotations to go from 0 to 100 during the stun duration. Other options might require him to set up more, which would take time away from the stun setup. But the other alt options such as Deep Sea Visitor, Heartstring Nocturne, Severed Innocence, the Brimstone all come out to be amazing for him, purely based off the given stats alone. Then heading down to the A tiers, the Marcado's Desire is clearly one of the best options given the attack buff is given through a chain attack. Then others like Cannon Rotor and Starlight Engine can be suitable for the fashionable Edward Cullen. Drive Discs are next, and here's where it gets a little muddy. Currently, I have 4 Hormone Punk as the best in slot for Hugo M0. The amount of attack that it provides gives him a nice cushion from the lack of support teammates that he won't be bringing onto the field. Then comes in the second best, Woodpecker. Averagely providing 80% attack, which definitely is not as high, but you can more consistently proc the basic and EX specials, so that's a plus. These are the only 2 right now that really fit with Hugo's burst style of gameplay, so no Polar Metals nor Puffer Electros. After the 4 set comes the 2 set, and if you were running Hormone, we here at J Corporate LLC ask that you grant your humongous Vlad crit rate via 2-piece Woodpecker to start until you reach the 88%. Then you can offset to things like B&B for more damage. If you're running 4 Woodpecker, well, then you already have your 2 crit rate locked in, so running B&B, attack, or ice damage bonus could all be viable. Pen percent could also be good too, but considering that if you are getting the W engine or higher Mindscape investments, the 25% defense ignore will diminish the realized percentage pen bonus you'll get. As for the main stats, run crit on 4, ice and attack on 5, and attack on 6, with crit rate priority, then attack, crit damage, and pen in the substats. Here are your basic guides again, and also a farming guide, if you'd like to pre-farm for the ginormous Vlad. Just make sure that to follow us over on Twitter and Discord if you like the individual sheets, and come catch us on Twitch to ask us questions on the lives. And with that, let's move straight into the team evaluations. And I'm not gonna lie, this section is going to be much shorter than others, yet going to surprise some folk, as Hugo Vlad essentially has tied us down to only using stun units. We are mainly going to be pairing him up with 2 stunners. The best in slots right now are the 2 other men in the party, that being Lycon and Lighter. The pairing of the Ice Res Down and Ice Damage bonus from each respective goes well with Hugo's offense, yet Lighter's core ability extending the stun duration by 3 seconds after finishing all over the enemies. Okay, guys, I kid you not again, this is what his kit literally says. It will grant you the morale stance, allowing you all the aforementioned buffs. Not only are the buffs strong, but the extended time on stun will help you maximize the Totalize with Hugo. Then after, you can consider sliding in characters like Kaleda, Trigger, and even Polkra, who I am an okay fan of, as you can get decent days production out of her on field. Yet I have tested out the 1 stun and support comps, and what do you know? They can actually compete so well with double stun options. Try out Hugo with a single support like Jshoea to make up for the bonus attack, and instead of running Hugo with Hormone Punk, this is where Woodpecker 4 actually becomes way more viable, as with higher difficulty runs, you'll be much more consistently able to dodge attacks and activate all 3 attack buffs from the 4 set passive and then just utilize the defensive assist from your stunner to compensate for the double stun action. In this instance, Hugo Vlad, Lighter, Jshoea team is actually the best in slot. Yet, you can slide in more alternative stun options to compensate, yet few can actually replace Jshoea's immense bonuses in the support slot, so only look to those who can make up for at least 600 extra attack, as he would have received from the second tier of his core buff. And I've tested out a few runs with each of the best comps I could come up with, all at M0 with Sig. The scores are scarily narrow. Yet, very rarely will you see Hugo without a stun at all within his team. And I did test out double support comps, and without getting too technical with it, let's just say the results were, bad. But most of us should have at least one, if not two stuns on hand for Gigamantis Vlad. And if we don't, Lighter is literally on the same banner, folks. Chop chop, come on, let's start pulling for our mans. Alright folks, welcome to our combat rotation dissection. Firstly, we're going to start off this battle with the setup. Aside from playing for performance bonuses, all you want to do with this comp is build up to two things. First, Lycon. And you might be wondering how one does that. Well, one aspect that's super underrated with attack comps is Anomaly. Yes, you want to be building up the Ice Anomaly, that's Freeze and Shatter, as the effects will grant you Frostbite, allowing you to gain extra crit damage. This effect lasts generally for 10 seconds, so as long as you do it during the setup or leading up to the stun, you should have it ready to be baked into your ultimate. Then, Lighter's Morale. Having to use up Lighter's full fuel gauge will grant you several things. Firstly is the morale boost that will grant you increased impact for your abilities, like abilities for your EX to finish the day's meter. But when you're in morale, you gain a 50% fire and ice res down, and with the additional fighting spirit bonus, you gain the massive total 75% ice and fire damage bonus. This is going to be key for every stun rotation, so make sure you generally end your setup with Lighter and move into the chain window with Lighter's EX or ultimate. Then after, you'll want to make sure to chain with Hugo Vlad to activate his reverb state, cancel your chain, and tag enemies with Lycon Special. This does two things. Firstly, Lycon's extra passive allows him to grant you an extra 35% damage multiplier when hitting a stunned enemy with anything. So with the special, you can apply this additional core ability and perform a heavy attack to get back into another chain with Hugo for just more damage, and then pop your Totalize via your EX special or ultimate. This is going to be your general combo. 1. Set up the buff and daze. 2. Set up your chain buffs. Then 3. Immediately Totalize with Hugo for the big damage you've been working so hard to build up to. And lastly, to round out the early access guide, we need to talk about Mindscapes and investments. Because, oh boy, if you are a Hugo Vlad fan, you're going to be so happy, as the Mockingbirds have some of the best Mindscapes in the game by far and none. Each of them are almost perfectly crafted towards him and allow him to extend his playstyle and even deal over 150% more damage in M2, which is almost unheard of. Let's start at the beginning with M1. This Mindscape will grant Hugo an extra 12% crit rate and 30% more crit damage during the reverb state. That's the buff that you get when you use a chain before activating your Totalize. The Mindscape in itself is already so strong as it allows you a bit more give on the build, and instead of an insanely demanding 88% crit rate, you can go to a respectable 76%, meaning more attack and more crit damage investments for better scaling multipliers. Then comes M2. This beautifully crafted Mindscape allows your ultimate, when triggering Totalize, to not end the enemy stun state, meaning that you can activate it yet again with the EX special to deal an additional Totalize. And each of them will ignore 15% of enemy defense. That is absurd. The girly pops who are going in for M2W1 will be pleased, as this is by far one of the strongest Mindscapes we've ever seen in the game to date. And it's no exaggeration, it literally gives him 3 nukes for every 2 others get, resulting in a potential 12 to 15% Totalize per DA runs, if you play your cards right. The M3 and M5 are skill increases, which actually is super strong, as again, the core takes the scaling of the abilities and multiplies them by 1000% on top with additional damage multipliers. Then you get the M4, which will now start to include your charge attack. That's the basic. Yeah, remember all the way back in the beginning of the guide when I said that nothing else really mattered except for the core, special, and ult? Now we can actually start to weave in the basic charge shot, and that will allow Hugo to further ignore an additional 12% ice res for 15 seconds, putting Lycon out of a job, potentially giving way to a trigger being one of your best in slot secondary stun options. And finally we get to the Juggernaut, the behemoth of a Mindscape, simple in its execution, but deadly in its effect. The M6 will grant all shooting attacks the ability to put Colossal Vlad into the reverb state, granting him all the crit values, and additionally will grant any Totalize an extra 60% increased damage. Yet, When utilizing an EX special punishment, Hugo can activate Totalize outside of the stuns and boost the damage multiplier of the finishing move by a fixed 1000%. This is pretty game changing, and if you're ready to invest into an M6 summoner character, Hugo Vlad will not disappoint and grant you some of the best returns in the game that they've ever created. Even going up against the likes of M6 Miyabi, which in earlier Mindscape levels he could not yet compete. Still, that's how much of a jump in the Mindscapes it is. Diabolical. For me, if and only if I were to invest, I would generally stop at M2. I would even actually suggest M2 with Marcados over the M1 S1, because the Mindscape makes up so much ground with the defense ignore and the M1 extended crit buffs. Yet, understandably, people like you are looking to the future. With so many bright and exciting units along the horizon, Hugo without said Mindscapes can still do okay, but not at the level that more than likely would match that of the new season units. But for now, that's all we have to say on Hugo Vlad. What do you think of this early access breakdown? Make sure to like and comment below if you'll be picking up our twink. I'll be jumping back into the lab to test out more things, but make sure to subscribe down below and check out our next video over here because YouTube thinks you'll like it. My name is Josh. Thank you so much for supporting us, and see you in the next one.